Hi, buddies! Welcome to Emergency Pineapple Studios, where I talk about things that I love, and hopefully you do too. And today, we're going to talk about Pokemon. So, Pokemon has been around for about 30 years and doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. And as a lifelong fan of these creatures, I've grown to appreciate a lot of the creative choices that have happened with some of them. That being said, I do think some of them have either been mistyped or should have had their types changed when certain things occurred. And I've compiled a list of these Pokemon that I think need to have either had their types changed or were just mistyped in general. And I'm going to start off by going through them region by region. This video is going to be about mostly the Pokemon in the Kanto region who I think were mistyped. So, without further ado, let's get started. Starting us off are the starters Charizard and Blastoise. I know people keep questioning why the fire-breathing dragon is not a dragon type. The reason is that if Charizard was a dragon type, it would resist the water type, which would throw off the balance of the starter trio. And where it may not be perfect, fire flying makes just as much sense as fire dragon. Blastoise, however, I have issues with. In Generation 2, the steel type was introduced, and the turtle with 2 steel cannons on its back did not receive this type. In addition, this turtle can learn Iron Tail, Iron Defense, Gyro Ball, and Flash Cannon. So it would make sense for this giant turtle to be a steel type. The main reason I think it didn't get this treatment was because since steel resists grass and is immune to poison, this would make Venusaur not strong against it. This is similar to the issue with Charizard not being a dragon type. However, I will still not forgive Kalos for not making Mega Blastoise a steel type. You cannot change my mind on this. It should have been a water steel type. Next up is Butterfree. I really think with the amount of psychic type moves it learns via TM, level up, and tutor, I think it should have been a psychic type instead of a flying type. Again, kind of like with Charizard, bug flying makes sense, but I definitely think it should have been a bug psychic type. Next up are Spearow and Fearow. A lot of their dex entries talk about how violent and vengeful they are. With that, and in early generations, they could learn a good number of dark type moves. I definitely think they were great candidates to be dark types. And I think if the fact that they were dark and flying types instead of normal flying, it would have distinguished themselves more from the Pidgey line, so that way they would be a little more unique. But that's just my opinion in general. Speaking of Pokemon that should have received the dark type in Generation 2, I think Arbok would have been a great candidate. This will definitely have made it better as a Pokemon overall, considering it could learn Bite, Crunch, Thief, and Dark Pulse. And on top of the fact that it has Intimidate, and a lot of its dex entries talking about how vicious and cruel it is, I think Arbok would have been so much better as a poison dark type as opposed to being just a pure poison type. Next up is the Vulpix line. Both Vulpix and Ninetales are based on Kitsunes, who are the nine-tailed fox spears from Japan, and a lot of their dex entries talk about how much magic or psychic powers they have. So I always wondered why Ninetales especially wasn't a psychic type at least. Nowadays, I could see it being a psychic or a fairy type when the fairy type was introduced back in Generation 6, but if it was given the fairy type, I think it would be too similar to Alolan Ninetales. But it always just seemed kind of weird to me that it was pure fire type. So I think from the get-go, these two Pokemon should have been fire psychic as opposed to being just pure fire type. Next up is Venomoth. Bug poison does work for it, but so would Bug psychic. It learns a lot of psychic type moves, plus back in Generation 1, Sabrina almost always had one of these. Honestly, Bug Poison still makes sense for it, but Bug Psychic would have also made sense. However, this does bring us to Psyduck and Golduck, who should have been Water Psychic types. They learned so many Psychic type moves via their level up, their TM, and tutor, and Psy is in the name for Psyduck. Now, granted, in Japanese, Psyduck is actually called Koduck, which just means child duck, but still, there was no reason for these two not to have been a Psychic type. Next is Hypno. Hypno should have gotten the Dark type back in Generation 2. There are so many event entries about this monster stealing dreams and then kidnapping children that this thing is straight up evil. Considering the Dark type is called the Evil type in Japan, this would have made it a perfect candidate. Also, being Psychic Dark type would have distinguished it more from Alakazam, kind of like the way that Arbok would have been better as a Poison Dark type. Overall, if Hypno was a Psychic Dark type, it would have made it a different alternative to Alakazam. Alakazam would have been a stronger Psychic type, but if Hypno had the Dark type, it would have just been a new experience and it would have different matchups. Generally, I think this thing was robbed when the Dark type came out. Next up is Marowak. I think OG Marowak should have also had the Ghost typing, considering it always wears the skull of its mother. Plus, there is a literal Ghost Marowak in the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town. I do acknowledge that Alolan Marowak receiving the Ghost type was kind of an homage to this, but I definitely think that the fact that Marowak wasn't a Ghost type was kind of odd. I think it would fit very well as a ground ghost, and it would have been a lot of fun having multiple immunities. Marowak would have been so much better as a ground ghost type. Now we get to Gyarados. And I'm going to be honest, I've always wondered about this thing's typing. It is a long blue sea serpent with origins from the biblical Leviathan and the azure dragon from Chinese mythology. So naturally, water dragon, right? No, water flying. Why? Just why? It knows so many more dragon type moves than flying type moves, and it's literally based off a draconic sea serpent. I get, and for a long time, it couldn't even fly. Yes, I am aware that recently in Legends Arceus there is in fact a flying Gyarados you can find in the Obsidian Fieldlands, but still, this thing is a dragon. You cannot tell me otherwise. And unlike Charizard needing to have a balancing act with the other two starters, this thing has no excuse. Water Dragon makes more sense than Water Flying. In fact, this thing makes less sense as a flying type than Charizard does, and that's saying something. Just make it a dragon. Please. Finally, there's the biggest typing mistake in Generation 1. Porygon. Why is this thing a normal type? It's literally a computer program with an AI. In my opinion, it should have been a Psychic Electric type. Psychic because it's a failed Mew clone, and Electric because it literally lives in a computer surviving on electricity. Honestly, if it was one or the other of those types, that would also make sense. But nope, for some reason, Pokemon decided to make this thing a normal type. Something that is given to normal, basic animals. Or things. Nothing about this thing is normal. Just look at it. Look at this thing. Nothing about this is a normal type. It should have been a Psychic Electric type. I'll die on this hill. And that's all the Pokemon in Kanto that I think were mistyped by the franchise. Overall, most of the typings make sense for this, but it just has a few outliers. Generally, I think a few of them should have just received the Dark type back when Generation 2 introduced it, but again, we're 20 years out of that, so it doesn't matter at this point. So, all in all, let me know what you guys think on if you agree or disagree with my assessments in the comments below. See you next time. Have fun catching Pokemon.